Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. This month we're going to work on doing something that's simple and very tricky at the same time, and that is painting a snow scene. In order to keep this as simple as possible, I'm going to keep it monochromatic, which means one color, and my color is going to be Payne's Gray. So I'm going to start with my piece of watercolor paper, and I'm going to develop my snow scene on top. So to get started, I need something to look at. I have some references printed off of couples in snow so that I can see how the snowflakes should look as they fall, and I can get a sense of how the snow looks when it's starting to cap the trees. But I'm not going to be copying any of the drawings. I'm going to use the three together to kind of develop my own sense of what I want to do here. So I'll start by sketching the general size of the couple. So I just have heads, and I think I like the idea of them being under an umbrella, and I'll have these trees that will frame the picture and give it some interest. When you're drawing people who are in the distance, draw the heads first and then make the features down from there. And the reference material should give you a good sense of proportion. So a person walking behind might be only as tall as the foreground man's head. And I'm just looking at those large shapes to develop the scene, and I'm looking at the negative shapes in between the two bodies as well. I'll have these trees that are far in the distance be much smaller, because remember, the closer you are to an object, the more contrast you're going to see and the more detail you're going to see. Also, the larger it's going to be. And then in the background, things are going to look very light, low contrast, low detail, smaller. Something like this. Okay. But then the next step is going to be to get a small dish. I like to use a porcelain mixing cup, but you can use anything. If you don't have anything that fancy, just get a disposable paper plate or something like that. And your masking fluid. You do have to have masking fluid for this next step. So I'm going to get my dish, I'm going to pour in some masking fluid, and then I need a stiff nylon brush or a toothbrush, because now I need to develop my snow. I want falling snow as well as snow that has already started to pile up on the trees. So for the piling up snow, I'm going to do a lot of avoiding when I'm painting, but for the falling snow, I need those white drops to be preserved from the very beginning. So I'm going to put down a protective background, because these spatters are going to get everywhere. Dip the nylon brush into your masking fluid, and then tap it sharply against your hand to start developing some drops. So you don't want it to get too blobby, but you do want to cover the scene with falling snow. So when you're done, you can put that aside, let it dry. It'll only take a few minutes, but make sure that you don't start painting until your masking fluid is completely dry to the touch. So when you're painting monochromatically, it's going to be hard to get a good sense of depth in your painting, because you're going to naturally tend towards making everything look the exact same, which is natural enough because you only have one color. But if you take just a second and practice laying down a wash of your color, you will quickly see that there is a huge variety in tone available to you. But here, let me show you what I mean. Tone is the lightness or darkness of a color. And so if I have a square of the very darkest, pure Payne's Gray, it looks something like that. But then I can lighten it by washing a little bit off my brush, and I come up with something like this. I can wash a little bit more off my brush, and here we have this. Do it again, and so on. And keep in mind too that your colors are going to dry a little bit lighter. But here I have very easily put down 5 distinct tones using one color. So that's the same sort of process that you have to focus on when you're painting monochromatically throughout your entire painting. So the first thing I want to do is to get a light wash that's going to allow all my snowflakes to pop. I'm going to go around some of these branches and I'm going to pull the color down. I do want to keep this very light, especially in the center right here, so it looks like there's light at the end of the tunnel and it doesn't look too menacing. Most of the snow is falling on the ground, of course, so don't put a wash over the ground. But now our first pass is done, and so let's let that dry completely, and then we'll come back and start to sharpen up some of the details in the figures and the trees. Now the sky is nice and dry. I'm going to use a large round, and I'm going to start adding some details and more darks to those trees. So generally you start from back to front, but in this case with these dark trees, I'm going to start with the dark shapes first. And since we only have one color we are working with, this is more difficult to have an interesting piece because I can't let multiple colors work on the page. So I have to have a variation in texture and tone, or my painting will look very flat and very dull. So in order to get that variation in tone, I can go back after putting down a flat base and just drop in some additional darks while the color is still wet. And here, this tree is a little farther behind, but it looks the same darkness, so I'm going to blot and pick up some of those darks and give it a little bit more variation in tone that way. Then in order to really punch up the perspective, I'm going to make these trees behind quite a bit lighter. And again, if it gets too dark to begin with, you can put down the color and then blot. The lights that you preserved are going to stay there, but these ones that you just avoided hopefully will wind up looking like snow on top of the branches. Make sure that you work around them carefully, otherwise you'll just paint right over the top. So look for the shape and then paint on the bottom side so that it will look like the branch has snow laying on the top. In order to realistically go from thick to thin, I need to be able to go from left to right because I'm right-handed. And so that might mean that I have to switch my paper around, start at the base, and then let the brush lift up to make a thinner branch as I move outward. So now let me take this off camera, do this same kind of work. It's just a matter of taking a lot of time and filling in all of these branches, and then I'll come back and we'll move forward from there. Okay, now my trees are painted, and so I can start adding some detail to the snow and the couple. And the people are just like the tree branches, so the ones that are in the far distance are going to be really light, and then as you come closer you're going to see more detail, more contrast. So before you start to paint, do a little test swatch so you know how dark your colors are going to be before you put them down. So I'm going to start with just a base tone that covers the whole figure, and then after those have dried, if I need to, I can go back and add some accent details with some darker colors. Alright, then also with that light color on the brush, I'm going to go in and add a little bit of shading under the tree branches and just avoid a ridge at the top of the little crest here so that it looks like a pile of snow. Remember, when you paint snow, you're actually painting everything but the snow. You have to think about those negative shapes. I have a few little lines of shadows, patterns that are being cast on the fallen snow by these trees. To do this step, I paint with a fairly wet wash, and then I put it down and I wash it out even more. And while it's still wet, I can go back and add a little bit more tone if needed, and that way not everything looks the same. So now let me go in with a larger brush and add a really nice wash to the shadow side of this ridge. Make sure that as you add these shadows to the trees, all of the shadows are going the same direction. They need to have a uniform light source. And then I can go into the figure, and I'm going to start with just a light wash over the top of everything, basically. preserving some of the lines here and there. But I want them to be very fluid and leaning into each other and sort of melting into each other, so that you can't necessarily see where one person ends and the other begins. And so to get that look, I'm going to need to look for the large shapes that encompass both figures together. And then after I've put down a wet wash, I can go in and add a little bit more tone. So now I'm adding these shadow shapes on top of the whole figure. And I'll add some tone to my umbrella. But even there I want a variation of tone, so I'm going to start dark and then wash out the color so I have a gradation from light to dark. And I'll darken up his hair, and I'll darken up her hair. I am going to start up in the sky where I know it's completely dry, and just use a rubber cement eraser, rub over the top like this, and look at the snowfall just pop out of the trees. Oh, it's beautiful. We've done the shadows, we've done the figures. They need a little bit more detail, so I can just add some darker Payne's gray. It needs to be very suggestive too, so don't try to get too bogged down in describing everything. You just want to give the impression of this couple kissing in the snow, and they're far enough away that the viewer shouldn't expect to be able to see everything, but you can give a surprising amount of detail with just a few suggestions. I'm going to be very careful and use an extremely light wash to add a little bit of shading on the faces. Just use the shading on the dark part of the face, like the eye, and let the viewer's eye fill in the rest of the detail there. The last thing that I want to do now is pull the tape off so that I can see how those trees look. Alright, this is the final piece, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. So you can see that even with one color, you can really make a good painting that has a lot of depth and has a good three-dimensional quality. So this exercise is a great way to help you focus on those negative shapes and the importance of varying tone in making a nice painting with a lot of depth to it. So definitely try this one at home. I will upload this painting so that you can use it as a reference to refer to. So that concludes this month's painting tutorial. I hope that you've learned some things you can take away with you that will be useful to you in this and other paintings. And as usual, thank you so much for watching.